Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Juliet Singler, and welcome to week 7 of History of Rock and Roll. This week, we're going to talk about a few different things. We're going to talk about folk, folk rock, Bob Dylan's influence. We're going to talk about Motown and some of the smaller record companies in the 60s. And I've got a few different things for you to do. You've got some short essay questions to complete. One is a comparison between the Rolling Stones and the Beatles. Number 2 is Bob Dylan, and I want you to select a Bob Dylan song that you like or that you're interested in and talk about the song. And then third, I'm going to ask you to talk about Berry Gordy's achievements in creating Motown. And the very last thing to do is a very short midterm exam that you can complete online. In the early 60s, folk rock became a focal point. As we discussed before, people that had grown up with rock and roll music in the 50s now were a little bit older and their tastes changed a bit. So New York was the focal point of the folk rock movement, but by 1965 it had moved to Los Angeles. Bob Dylan went electric in that same year. What was the song? Yes, it was Like a Rolling Stone. And you know what? Rolling Stone magazine lists this song as one of the most important rock and roll songs of all time. I have to say I couldn't figure that out for the longest time, but after learning a little bit more about Bob Dylan, I understand it. It's because he put himself at great risk by changing his sound, and in fact it made his fans so mad that he went electric that they practically booed him off stage, and it took them a very long time to warm up to it. But he changed the course of music history by doing that. It allowed other folk artists to also incorporate electric instruments, and that translated over into country music as well. Well, folk rock was so appealing in those days because it was often tied to American history. It reflected our pride in who we were as a nation and this great melting pot of cultures that we experience here. And it also often led to social change because these folk songs could bring up important issues like civil rights and talk about them and get people to aspire towards a better world and work towards it. Let's have a little background on Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan was born in 1941. He began singing in his early teens, and he was singing in clubs from a very early age. At first, he copied the songs of people like his idol Woody Guthrie, who wrote, "This land is your land, this land is my land." And then he began writing his own songs. Well, because of his ability to advocate for social change and his personal integrity, he soon became like a messiah of folk rock. There was another folk singer, songwriter named Joan Baez, who was also a civil rights activist, and she was hugely popular before Dylan was. She took him on tour with her and presented him to her audiences and helped build his career. And soon his career eclipsed hers, and he became the focal point, almost the messiah of folk rock. Well, fast forward a few years, just a few, and we're at 2016. Bob Dylan actually won the Nobel Prize for Literature in that year. This is an international honor that is valued at over $1 million. And there are some requirements. First of all, you have to accept the award. And then you also have to give a lecture that cites your influences. Well, folks, it has never before been awarded to a musician, and certainly not to a musician who had only a high school education. So I admit that Bob Dylan was a little hard for me to get into at first because when I was growing up and I heard him sing, I was turned off because I was studying singing and I wanted to make beautiful sounds, and he doesn't make beautiful sounds. But when you look at his poetry and his enormous influence on music, you can't help realizing that he was really a very influential figure, not only in music, but also even in literature. Now, here's how Bob Dylan accepted this award. He wrote an acceptance letter and he said, "Thank you very much. I'm very flattered by this award, but I really didn't, it surprises me. I really didn't expect to have an impact on literature. I'm a songwriter, and I'm concerned, he said, like Shakespeare was in his time, not with elements of literature or the impact that I'm going to have, but how we're going to perform this work that we've created. And he continues to say, I'm paraphrasing, of course, the thing that I do is write songs and perform them. And if you really want to appreciate what I do, listen to my songs, is what he said. So he took a kind of an unorthodox approach uh, to his acceptance speech. And then his lecture is really unique as well. I am not going to play it for you, but you really should listen to it if you're interested. You can find it on YouTube. And what he did was he recorded his lecture, and he plays a little light jazz music behind it as he's speaking. And he talks about some of his early influences. One of his earliest influence, he says, was Buddy Holly. And he talks about that moment when he drove 100 miles to see Buddy Holly in a concert, and how he was transfixed by this guy on stage and felt like he had so much in common with him. And he even talks about a moment where Buddy Holly looks at him, and in that moment, he says, something transmitted from Holly to him. And in a few days, Buddy Holly was gone in that tragic plane accident that we've talked about before. He also talks about other influences. He cites a number of books, 3 different books that he read in high school as being very influential. The books were, maybe you can relate to this, Moby Dick by Melville, right? And then All Quiet on the Western Front. This is a novel about World War I and the horrors of war. The third was from Greek epic poetry, the Odyssey. It's the story of a king's search for the golden fleece, his journeys on the water, and his return home. So, if you want to think about this deeply, you can see some of these influences in the way that he writes, because he writes about sometimes not the horrors of war, but maybe you could say the horrors of modern living. If that doesn't inspire you to find out more about Bob Dylan, have a look at this. This is a painting made by Bob Dylan of our very own Courtesy Coffee Shop that you can see on the corner of Hobson Way and Lovekin in Blythe, California. And he is an accomplished painter. This was part of a series called The Beaten Path that was on exhibition in 2016. I believe you can also find his works made into art books, coffee table books. So you're going to talk about a Dylan song of your choosing. Let's explore one together. I've told you what my favorite songs are, but there is a song that's profiled in your book. It's called Positively 4th Street, and it's profiled in your book on page 192. So if I were profiling this, I might tell some of the background of the song. It was written in 1965. It's in simple verse form. This is a form that is frequently used by Bob Dylan because it's not distracting to listen to. You don't listen to the musical elements of simple verse form because it's very predictable. The same music for each verse. That allows the storyteller to really say what he has to say, and that's what happens with Bob Dylan. He has a lot to say. If you weigh his music against the lyrics of other writers, he has usually many more lyrics. You could only maybe compare him to modern rap artists in terms of how much he has to say in his lyrics. So this is in simple verse form. It's in a 4/4 meter. And the interesting thing about the background of the song is that it expresses his outrage at the folk rock movement's inability to accept his electrified sound on the song Like a Rolling Stone. And I'll ask you to listen to that outside of class a little bit, but what you notice about it is that the music is predictable, but he says, you know what, you said you were a friend, but basically you stabbed me in the back and you're really not a friend. And you hear his electric guitar playing on this. It's lightly electrified. I had to listen to a number of different versions to really figure out if he was playing an acoustic guitar with a pickup or an actual electric guitar. It does seem from the videos I've watched that it was an electric guitar, a standard electric guitar. And then there's a neat feature because, like the song Like a Rolling Stone, Al Kooper is featured on the organ in this song. And so it makes a very tasteful little addition to the song. There are also finger cymbals on the fourth beat of each measure. So this is intriguing to me because I knew the song Like a Rolling Stone very well, but I wasn't familiar with this song. I listened to many different versions, and I found that I liked not only Bob Dylan's version of it, but I also really enjoyed Jerry Garcia's version of it. It's a little bit slower, and it has some great guitar solos. Jerry Garcia, of course, is the lead creative force in the band The Grateful Dead. Here are the lyrics from Positively 4th Street. You got a lot of nerve to say you are my friend. When I was down, you just stood there grinning. You got a lot of nerve to say you got a helping hand to lend. You just want to be on the side that's winning. You say I let you down, you know it's not like that. If you're so hurt, then why don't you show it? If you say you've lost your faith, but that's not where it's at. You have no faith to lose, and you know it. So the lyrics are always a highlight for me in a Dylan song. He speaks like a regular person, and he speaks with the bite of quite a lot of cynicism, oftentimes. And this is a prime example of that. So that's how you might approach a song that you like by Dylan, and I'll be interested to see what you come up with. So there's some great songs. I really want to encourage you to explore songs like Hurricane and Visions of Johanna, because they have a very interesting background. By the way, speaking of Jerry Garcia covering the Dylan song that we were just talking about, Positively 4th Street, many others have covered Dylan songs, and his own versions were popular, but the other recordings of them were even more popular. So we have Blowin' in the Wind by Peter, Paul, and Mary, Mr. Tambourine by the Byrds, and Stevie Wonder also recorded that, Farewell Angelina by Joan Baez, All Along the Watchtower by Jimi Hendrix, If Not For You was recorded by George Harrison, of course, of the Beatles. And the artists that I've starred, Peter, Paul, and Mary, the Byrds, Joan Baez, these were all artists who were part of that folk rock music, and names you should know. Well, another thing that was happening in the 60s was this phenomenon of garage bands. Young people getting together and saying, hey, we love rock and roll. We may not have a lot of skill, but let's put together a band. And very quickly, they achieved enough skill to cover some of the songs that were popular in the day and made recordings that were profitable with very low cost. The music industry was becoming more and more corporate. They caught on to this and they began to think, you know what, we can put some bands together and make TV shows out of them. So they did that with groups like the Monkees, which was a popular band that was put together for the creation of a TV show in the 60s. They had a great hit with the song Last Train to Clarksville. And then they also had another group, the Partridge Family, that was another similar type of manufactured for TV family band show. These were programs that I watched and I enjoyed when I was growing up. Let's talk a little bit about Motown Records before we conclude. I really want you to watch the video that I've set up in the lesson for today, in the assignment, because you'll learn so much about it. But Berry Gordy, it must be said, created an incredible corporation in Motown Records. It became a global corporation and the largest Black-owned corporation in the world at one time. So it's really going to be great for you to find out the different things that Berry Gordy did. The biggest thing was he took almost a Detroit auto workers approach to creating and polishing musical artists. I'm interested in finding out what you learn about that. So complete that question for me online and the others, and then take your midterm exam. Thank you.